It was a hot day in the Arizona Territory, the sun blazing high above the desert land. The small town of Fort Grant sat quietly, its dusty streets filled with the sound of creaking wagons and boots scraping on the dirt. It was a place where people came to settle, to farm, and to make a living, but it was also a place where tensions ran high. News had spread quickly throughout the town. An Apache girl had been captured. Her name was Kia, and she was as strong and tall as the desert mountains that surrounded the town. Kia had been accused of helping her tribe in raids against settlers. Some said she had been seen watching the town from the hills. Others believed she had been part of the attacks that had caused fear and loss in nearby settlements. Regardless of what was true, Kia had been arrested and was now facing the punishment that the settlers thought she deserved. The townspeople gathered in the center of Fort Grant, their voices filled with anger and excitement. They had come to witness the hanging of the Apache girl. Many of them had lost family members or friends in the raids and saw this as a way to get justice. Some even cheered, eager to see the girl pay for what they believed she had done. Kia stood silently at the gallows, her hands tied behind her back. She was tall for a woman, nearly 6 feet, with long black hair that reached the middle of her back. Her dark eyes stared straight ahead, betraying no fear. Her face was calm, though her heart was racing. The sun beat down on the crowd, and a sheriff, his badge shining in the light, stood near the hanging rope. He gave a brief speech about justice, about the threat the Apache posed to the settlers, and about the necessity of punishing those who would harm the peaceful life they had built. The noose was placed around Kia's neck, and the crowd fell silent. Among the crowd, a man named Nathaniel Hayes watched from the edge of the gathering. He was a quiet man, a former soldier who had seen much in his time. He wasn't like the others in town. While many of the settlers held grudges against the Apache, Nathaniel didn't share their hatred. He had grown up in the wilderness and knew that there were good people in every tribe, just as there were bad ones in every town. Nathaniel had arrived in Fort Grant just days before. He had been tracking animals for the local hunters but had been trying to keep to himself. The noise of the hanging caught his attention. At first he didn't want to get involved. But something about Kia's calmness, the way she stood tall in the face of death, stirred something inside him. He had seen enough senseless violence in his life. He had lost friends, fought in wars, and witnessed cruelty in the name of justice. It wasn't right to kill this girl, not without knowing the whole story. Nathaniel stepped forward, his boots barely making a sound on the dry ground. He moved with purpose, his eyes fixed on Kia, who was still standing at the gallows. Without warning, he drew his rifle and aimed it at the rope that held Kia. The crowd gasped. The sheriff spun around, his eyes wide with shock. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He fired once. The shot rang out sharp and clear in the hot air. The rope snapped. Kia fell, landing hard on the ground, her body hitting the dirt with a thud. The crowd was stunned, frozen in place. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then chaos broke out. The sheriff shouted, ordering the militia to capture the man who had just saved the Apache girl. The townspeople screamed, some calling for Nathaniel's arrest, others shouting in fear of what this might mean for their safety. But Nathaniel didn't care. He had acted on instinct, and now he had no choice but to run. He ran toward the edge of the town, his heart pounding in his chest. Kia, still lying on the ground, slowly got to her feet. She didn't speak, but she looked at Nathaniel with a mix of confusion and gratitude in her eyes. Without a word, Nathaniel grabbed her by the arm and pulled her into the nearby woods. He could hear the sounds of pursuit behind them, the shouts of the sheriff and his men growing louder. But he didn't stop. He knew the only way to keep Kia alive was to get her as far away from the town as possible. They ran through the trees, their footsteps silent on the soft earth. Nathaniel could hear Kia's heavy breathing, but she kept pace with him, her tall frame moving quickly despite the tightness of the rope around her wrists. For a while, they ran without speaking, the sound of the town fading behind them. Finally, when they had reached a small creek that cut through the land, Nathaniel stopped to catch his breath. He looked at Kia, his eyes filled with questions. Kia didn't speak at first. She just stood there, her face blank but her eyes full of emotion. Then, after a long moment, she spoke in a low voice, her words broken but clear enough for Nathaniel to understand. "Why did you save me?" she asked. Nathaniel hesitated. He didn't know exactly why. Maybe it was because he knew what it felt like to be judged by others, to be seen as something you weren't. Maybe it was because he couldn't stand the thought of watching another innocent person die. I couldn't just stand by and watch, he said quietly. No one deserves to die like that. Kia nodded slowly. You're different, she said. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Nathaniel didn't know what to say. He didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel brave. He just felt that he had done what was right. For now, though, they had to keep moving. There was no time to think about what would happen next. The militia would be coming for them. And in the wilds of the Arizona Territory, with the dangers of nature all around them, they would have to rely on each other to survive. The Arizona desert was wide and unforgiving. The sun hung high in the sky, casting its heat upon the land, turning the air into a shimmering wave of heat. Nathaniel and Kia moved swiftly, their footsteps silent on the soft earth. They had been running for hours, with the sound of the town's pursuit slowly fading behind them, but they both knew it was not over. They had no time to waste. Nathaniel, though used to the wilds of the desert, could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had never imagined that one act of mercy could turn into such a dangerous game. His hand gripped his rifle tightly and his eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of danger. He knew they couldn't stay in one place for long. Kia, on the other hand, moved with a quiet determination. Though she had been captured by the settlers, she was no stranger to survival in the harsh desert environment. Her people, the Apache, had lived in these lands for generations, and she had learned how to navigate its challenges from an early age. Despite her calm exterior, Nathaniel could tell that she was calculating every move. She was not just a victim of the settlers' anger, she was a survivor. They reached a small creek in the shade of a few scattered mesquite trees. Nathaniel slowed to catch his breath, and Kia did the same. Both of them knelt by the water, drinking in silence. The cool water was a welcome relief from the hot desert air, but Nathaniel knew it wouldn't last. They needed to keep moving. We need to keep going, Nathaniel said after a moment, looking up at Kia. His voice was low, careful not to attract attention. Kia nodded without saying a word, her long black hair falling in front of her face as she lifted her head. Her silence was not an indication of fear, but of focus. She understood the urgency of their situation. The town would send men to track them down, and soon enough they would be in danger again. Nathaniel had seen this kind of desperation before, people on the run, fighting to survive. But there was something different about Kia. Her strength, both physical and mental, impressed him. She wasn't just trying to escape. She was calculating her next move. She wasn't like the other captives he had seen, broken and resigned to their fate. No, Kia was different. As they made their way deeper into the desert, Nathaniel couldn't help but wonder about her life before this moment. What was it like for her, living among the Apache? What had made her so calm in the face of death? And why had she been so willing to trust him? He knew that he had done the right thing in saving her, but he also knew that the road ahead would be difficult for both of them. They couldn't just wander the desert forever. They needed shelter, food, and, most importantly, a plan. Nightfall arrived quickly, the desert air cooling as the sun dipped below the horizon. They found a cave nestled among the rocky cliffs, hidden from view. It wasn't much, but it would have to do for now. Nathaniel made a small fire, careful not to let the smoke rise too high, and they settled in for the night. As the flames flickered, casting shadows on the cave walls, Kia finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, as if she were choosing her words carefully. "Why did you save me?" she asked. Nathaniel looked at her, his face lit by the firelight. He had been expecting this question. He didn't have an easy answer. "I couldn't just let them hang you," he said quietly. "It wasn't right." Kia nodded slowly, her dark eyes reflecting the fire's glow. "You are a strange man," she said, her voice full of curiosity. "Most of your kind would have left me to die." Nathaniel sighed, his eyes drifting toward the fire. "I'm not like most men," he said, his voice distant. Kia didn't push him further. She seemed to accept his answer for now. The silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. They both understood that they were in this together, two strangers bound by circumstance. As the fire burned down to embers, Nathaniel took out his map and looked at it under the dim light. He had traveled these parts before, but never in such a dangerous situation. He traced a finger along the paper, looking for the nearest settlement or any place they might be able to find shelter. "We can't go back to the town," Nathaniel said, folding the map up. The militia will be looking for us. We'll need to find another way out. Kia nodded again, but her face remained unreadable. She had been running from the settlers for years, ever since her tribe had been pushed further and further into the desert by encroaching settlers. She had seen what happened when her people tried to resist, and she knew that Nathaniel's act of kindness would not go unnoticed. "We go east," she said, pointing to the map. "There is a place, a hidden valley. My people go there when they need to escape." Nathaniel studied her for a moment, considering the idea. He didn't know much about Apache lands, but if Kia believed it was safe, he trusted her judgment. "All right," he said. "We go east." The next morning, they broke camp early and began their journey eastward. The air was cool, but the desert's heat would soon return. They moved cautiously, aware that they were now fugitives in a land that could either offer them shelter or death. As they walked, Kia shared more about her life and her people. She spoke of her tribe's history, how they had lived in the desert for generations, and how they had been forced to fight for their land and way of life as settlers slowly moved into their territory. Nathaniel listened quietly, absorbing everything she said. For the first time since he had come to the desert, Nathaniel began to understand the Apache people not as enemies, but as survivors. They were not just the wild fighters that the settlers often described. They were people with families, traditions, and a deep connection to the land. As the day wore on, they encountered a small group of travelers, a family of traders making their way across the desert. They stopped briefly to exchange food and water, and Nathaniel couldn't help but notice how Kia seemed to blend in with the travelers. She spoke to them in the Apache language, her voice calm and respectful, and the traders offered them a few supplies without question. It was a reminder that the desert was full of people, some friendly, some not, but it was also a place where trust could be built, even in the most difficult of circumstances. By the time the sun began to set, they had traveled several miles. The shadows of the desert cliffs grew long and the air turned cooler. They were still on the run, but for the first time in a long while, Nathaniel felt a sense of hope. They weren't alone in this wild, unforgiving land. Together they could survive. The sun rose early the next day, casting a soft orange glow over the Arizona desert. The air was cool, and the silence of the land was broken only by the distant calls of birds and the sound of wind rustling through the sparse desert plants. Nathaniel and Kia had been traveling for hours, moving eastward toward the hidden valley that Kia had spoken of. They had left the familiar, dangerous terrain of Fort Grant far behind, but they both knew that they couldn't rest easy. The pursuit was far from over. Kia walked with quiet confidence, her long legs moving swiftly across the dry earth. Nathaniel kept pace beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. The landscape seemed endless, with nothing but the rugged desert stretching out in all directions. Despite the beauty of the land, Nathaniel felt a deep unease. They were still fugitives, running from a town that would stop at nothing to capture them. Kia had told him stories about her people, the Apache, and the way they had been forced to fight for their survival as settlers moved into their territory. Nathaniel had listened closely, trying to understand the deeper struggles that the Apache had faced. He had seen the hostility between the settlers and the Apache, but he hadn't realized the full extent of the pain and loss that the Apache had endured. It was a painful history, one that seemed to have no end. As they walked, Nathaniel couldn't help but wonder what would happen once they reached the valley. Would Kia's people accept them? Would they be safe? He didn't know much about the Apache, but he knew that their ways were different from the settlers he had grown up with. Would they trust him, a man who was, by all accounts, an outsider? Kia, on the other hand, was calm. She had been born and raised among the Apache, and her connection to the land and her people was as deep as the desert itself. She had spoken of the hidden valley as a place where her tribe could find refuge when they needed to escape, but she had never mentioned what kind of welcome they would receive. Nathaniel couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for them, something that neither of them could predict. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, they took a brief break near a small creek, resting in the shade of a few stunted trees. Nathaniel drank from his canteen, his eyes fixed on the water, lost in thought. Kia sat a little farther away, her gaze far off as if she were looking for something. Her silence was both comforting and unsettling. Nathaniel didn't know how to approach her, but he wanted to say something, anything to ease the tension between them. "Do you think your people will help us?" he asked after a long pause. Kia turned to look at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood and began to walk toward the edge of the creek, as though she were contemplating the question herself. After a few moments, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "I don't know," she said. "I hope so. My people are proud and fierce, but they are also bound by tradition. They may not see you as a friend." Nathaniel's heart sank. He had known that it wouldn't be easy, but hearing the doubt in Kia's voice made it feel more real. He wondered if he had made a mistake. He had saved her life, but what would it cost them both? Before he could say anything more, Kia's sharp eyes narrowed as she looked into the distance. Nathaniel followed her gaze and saw something that made his heart race. In the distance, a group of riders were approaching, their figures silhouetted against the bright sky. "Apache," Kia whispered, her tone filled with a mix of recognition and fear. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle and stood, his instincts kicking in. Kia was already moving, crouching low behind a rock. Nathaniel followed her, his heart pounding. He knew this could be the moment of truth. Were they friends or were they enemies? As the riders drew closer, Nathaniel could see that they were Apache, but they were not like the traders they had met earlier. These men were dressed for battle, their faces hardened with experience. They rode with the kind of confidence that only comes from a life lived in constant danger. Their horses kicked up dust as they galloped closer, and Nathaniel could feel the tension building in the air. Kia stood slowly, her face calm, but her posture tense. She spoke in the Apache language, her words low but clear. The riders stopped when they saw her, and for a moment there was a long silence. The leader of the group, a tall man with a face as weathered as the desert, looked at Kia and then at Nathaniel. The leader's eyes narrowed, and Kia stepped forward, speaking again in the Apache tongue. Nathaniel couldn't understand what they were saying, but he could feel the weight of their words, the intensity of the moment. He had saved Kia's life, but now he was standing face to face with her people, and he had no idea what would happen next. Finally, the leader of the riders spoke, his voice deep and strong. "Why have you come here, daughter of the Apache?" Kia stood tall, her head held high. "I seek refuge," she said simply, her voice steady. "This man saved my life. He does not deserve to die." The leader looked at Nathaniel, his gaze calculating. There was a long pause before he spoke again. "The Apache are a proud people," he said. "We do not forget those who harm us, but we also do not forget those who help us." Nathaniel's heart raced. He didn't know if the leader was speaking about the settlers or about him. Either way, he felt as though he were standing on the edge of a great precipice. One wrong move, one wrong word, and everything could collapse. The leader turned his gaze back to Kia. "You are fortunate, daughter. We will take you to the chief. He will decide what happens next." Kia nodded, her expression unreadable. She looked at Nathaniel, and for a brief moment their eyes met. It was as if they were both trying to understand what would come next, what the future held for them. The leader signaled to his men, and they turned their horses toward a distant hill. Kia and Nathaniel followed, moving cautiously behind them. As they rode, the weight of the journey ahead settled on Nathaniel's shoulders. He didn't know what the Apache chief would say, but he knew one thing for certain. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, and the fate of them both was now in the hands of the Apache leader. The air was thick with tension as Nathaniel and Kia rode through the desert landscape, following the Apache riders to their leader. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. It had been a long day of traveling, and despite their best efforts to stay quiet, Nathaniel could feel the weight of what was about to happen. The chief, the leader of the Apache tribe, was a man who commanded great respect, and Nathaniel had no idea what the outcome of this meeting would be. Would he be welcomed, or would his presence cause trouble for Kia? Kia, riding beside him, appeared calm, but Nathaniel could see the subtle tension in her posture. Her hands gripped the reins tightly, and her eyes were focused ahead as if preparing herself for something important. She hadn't said much since the Apache riders had found them, but Nathaniel could sense that she was deep in thought. She had lived her whole life among the Apache, but this was different. This wasn't just about her people. It was about the decision she would need to make between the tribe that had raised her and the man who had saved her life. The group of Apache riders led them to a small hill, and from the top they could see a hidden valley below. It was a beautiful, quiet place, surrounded by cliffs and trees. a peaceful haven tucked away from the chaos of the outside world. Nathaniel could understand why the Apache would seek refuge here. It felt safe, untouched by the hands of settlers who had been pushing farther and farther into their land. At the base of the hill stood a large camp, with a fire burning in the center and several tents pitched around it. The riders dismounted and gestured for Nathaniel and Kia to do the same. As they walked toward the fire, a figure emerged from one of the tents. A tall, strong-looking man, his face lined with age but sharp with authority. His hair was long, tied back in a simple braid, and his eyes were dark and serious. He was the Apache chief. The chief's gaze landed on Kia first. There was a brief moment of silence as they exchanged a look. It was a look that spoke of history, of family, and of a bond that ran deep in the Apache tribe. Kia stepped forward, her posture straight and respectful. She spoke in the Apache language, her voice steady but soft. "I have returned, father," Kia said, her words laced with both respect and a quiet sorrow. The chief's expression softened for a moment, but it was quickly replaced by a more serious look as he turned his attention to Nathaniel. His eyes narrowed, and Nathaniel could feel the weight of his gaze. The air around them grew even heavier as the chief studied him, clearly trying to understand who this man was and why he had come. "You saved my daughter's life," the chief said, his voice deep and firm. It wasn't a question but a statement, and Nathaniel could feel the gravity of it. Nathaniel nodded, his throat tight. "I did what I had to do," he replied simply. His voice was steady, though his heart was racing. "She didn't deserve to die." The chief's eyes held him for a moment longer before he spoke again, this time with a hint of something else in his voice. Perhaps curiosity, or maybe even respect. "You're not like the others," he said. "Most men would have left her to hang." Nathaniel wasn't sure if that was meant as a compliment or a challenge, but he stood his ground. "I'm not like most men," he said, his voice quiet but clear. The chief didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to one of his warriors, a tall man who had been standing by the fire, watching the conversation carefully. The warrior nodded and stepped forward, raising his hand to his forehead in a traditional gesture of respect. The chief then looked back at Nathaniel. "I want to understand why you risked your life for my daughter. Why did you do it?" Nathaniel hesitated for a moment. He had never been one to share his feelings easily, but he knew that this moment was crucial. The chief was testing him, and he needed to be honest. "I couldn't stand by and let it happen," he said, his voice steady but soft. "I've seen enough death, enough pain to know that it's not right. No one deserves to die without a chance." The chief studied him carefully, as if weighing his words. There was silence again, thick and heavy, and Nathaniel could feel the chief's eyes piercing through him. Finally, the chief spoke. "I do not trust easily, especially not those who come from the other side," he said, his voice serious. "But my daughter believes you to be different. And in our ways, family is everything." Kia stepped forward now, her voice calm but firm. "Father Nathaniel saved me. He didn't have to, but he did. I owe him my life." The chief's gaze shifted from Nathaniel to Kia. For a moment his expression softened again, but it quickly hardened as he spoke once more. "You owe him your life, yes," the chief said, "but there is more to our ways than just saving lives. There is the matter of trust. There is the matter of loyalty to our people." Nathaniel nodded. "I understand that. I'm not asking to be part of your tribe or your family. I'm not asking for anything. I just want to make sure she's safe." The chief studied him for a long time, his dark eyes searching Nathaniel's face, as if trying to find some truth hidden beneath the surface. The silence stretched out, making Nathaniel feel more uncomfortable by the second. He could feel the weight of this moment. The decision the chief would make could change everything. Finally, the chief spoke again, his voice heavy with decision. "We are a people who have fought for everything we have," he said slowly, "and we do not forget easily. You will stay here tonight, and tomorrow I will decide whether or not to allow you to leave in peace. Do not mistake my kindness for weakness. You are not welcome here by my hand yet." Nathaniel felt a wave of relief mixed with anxiety. He had expected something like this. He had known that trust would not come easily. He didn't know what the next day would bring, but for now they were safe. For tonight, at least, they had a place to rest. As the chief turned to leave, he gave Kia one last look. "You are my daughter," he said quietly, "and you will always have a place with us. But remember that the decisions you make now will affect more than just you." Kia nodded, her face a mask of both gratitude and sorrow. Nathaniel could see the burden of her past weighing heavily on her shoulders. The chief's words hung in the air like an unspoken promise. Nathaniel didn't know what would happen the next day. But for now they had time to rest, to reflect, and to prepare for whatever would come next. And as the fire crackled in the center of the camp, he realized that the road ahead was far from certain, but they would face it together. The morning after the tense meeting with the Apache chief, Nathaniel awoke early, his eyes heavy with sleep but his mind wide awake. The desert air was cool, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, casting soft pink and gold hues across the sky. The camp was quiet except for the crackling of the dying fire and the distant calls of birds as they began their search for food. Nathaniel stood up slowly, his muscles stiff from the long days of travel and the weight of the decisions that still lay ahead. He looked around at the Apache camp, his eyes taking in the tents, the few warriors still on watch, and the solemnity of the place. This wasn't a place for lightheartedness. This was a place of survival, of family, and of hard choices. Nathaniel knew that whatever happened today, things would never be the same again. Kia was sitting near the fire, her back straight, her dark eyes staring into the flames. She had not spoken much since the night before, her mind clearly preoccupied with the events that were unfolding. Nathaniel could feel the weight of her thoughts, and though he wanted to speak to her, he knew she needed time to process everything. As he approached, Kia looked up, her gaze meeting his. There was a depth to her eyes, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow that spoke volumes. She opened her mouth to say something but closed it again, her lips pressed together as if she were unsure of what to say. Nathaniel sat beside her, careful not to intrude too much into her quiet space. "I know you're worried," he said softly. "But whatever happens today, I want you to know that I didn't come here to cause trouble. I came because I thought you deserved a chance. I won't let anything happen to you." Kia nodded, her expression unreadable. She said nothing at first, but her eyes seemed to soften. After a long moment, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what will happen," she said. "My people, they are not quick to forgive. And my father, the chief, his decisions are never easy. There's so much history between the Apache and the settlers. Too much blood has been shed on both sides." Nathaniel could hear the pain in her voice, the weight of generations of struggle, and it made his heart ache. He had always seen the world in black and white. But now he was beginning to understand the shades of gray that shaped the lives of people like Kia and her tribe. "I don't expect forgiveness," Nathaniel said quietly, his voice steady. "But if there's a chance for peace, I want to be part of it, even if it's just a small part." Kia turned her gaze to the fire, watching as the flames flickered and danced. "You have already given us a chance," she said softly. "But sometimes a chance isn't enough." Before Nathaniel could respond, one of the Apache warriors approached, his face serious. "The chief wishes to speak with you," he said, his tone formal. Nathaniel stood, his stomach tightening with nerves. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for, but also the moment he had feared. The chief's decision would determine not only Kia's fate, but his own as well. He followed the warrior through the camp, his heart pounding in his chest. The camp seemed quieter now, the people aware of the importance of the meeting that was about to take place. Nathaniel could feel the weight of their gaze as they watched him pass, and he couldn't help but feel like an outsider. To them, he was just a man from a world they didn't fully trust, someone who had broken their rules by saving Kia's life. But he couldn't change the past. All he could do was face the future. When he reached the chief's tent, the large figure of the Apache leader was waiting for him, his posture regal and commanding. The chief's eyes were unreadable, his face a mask of determination. There was no anger in his expression, but there was no warmth either, just the kind of seriousness that only comes with years of leadership and hard decisions. "You saved my daughter," the chief began, his voice deep and steady, "and for that you have earned my respect. But that does not mean that I trust you." Nathaniel stood tall, his hands at his sides. He had expected this. The chief wasn't offering kindness or mercy out of any sense of obligation. He was offering it because he respected Kia's wishes, but Nathaniel knew that trust would take much longer to earn. "I understand," Nathaniel said, his voice steady, "but I will do whatever it takes to earn it." The chief studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "You are a man of your word. I see that. But the Apache are a proud people. We do not forget the past easily. We do not forgive those who have wronged us without consequence. Nathaniel's stomach tightened. He knew this was coming. He had known that saving Kia's life could come with a price, but he hadn't known what that price would be. Would he have to leave, to walk away from everything he had risked? The chief's eyes softened just a little. I will let you leave in peace, but you must understand that this land, this tribe, is not yours to take. It is ours. You will never be accepted as one of us, no matter what you do. And if you ever return to these lands with ill intentions, you will not leave alive. That is the price of your mercy. Nathaniel's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't what he had hoped for, but it wasn't as bad as he had feared. The chief wasn't demanding his life. He was giving him a chance to walk away. Alive, but forever separated from the Apache people. I understand, Nathaniel said, his voice quiet but resolute. And I will honor your decision. The chief gave a slow nod. You have done something many would never have dared. For that you have earned my respect. But I will not ask you to stay. You do not belong here. Nathaniel's chest felt heavy, but he didn't show it. He knew the chief was right. He didn't belong with the Apache. He was a man caught between two worlds, and neither one would fully accept him. But in the end, he had done what he believed was right, and that he thought was worth something. As Nathaniel turned to leave the chief's tent, Kia was waiting for him outside. Her face was calm, but her eyes held a sadness that seemed to mirror his own. She stepped forward, her gaze steady. So what will you do now? She asked, her voice soft. I'll leave, Nathaniel said. I'll go back to the world I know. Kia nodded slowly, as if she had already known the answer. And me? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Nathaniel looked at her, his heart heavy. You will return to your people, to your tribe. This is where you belong. For a long moment they stood there, saying nothing, feeling the weight of the moment. It was the end of a journey, but the beginning of a different one for both of them. A journey that would take them down separate paths shaped by the choices they had made. I'll never forget what you did for me, Kia said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Nathaniel. He nodded, his own throat tight. Goodbye, Kia, and with that they parted ways. Nathaniel walked away, his heart heavy but his conscience clear, knowing that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to walk away from something that could never truly be his.